The rain had fallen all night, leaving the cobbled path to Hawthorne Bridge slick and shining beneath the early morning sun. Beatrice Cunningham tightened her scarf and stepped carefully, her boots echoing faintly under the old stone archway. It was the same walk she took every Sunday after church, a quiet moment before returning to her husband, Edward, and their immaculate Georgian home in Bath Ford. That morning, something unusual caught her eye. A corner of yellowed paper peeked out from between the cracks of the bridge stones, half-soaked and trembling in the breeze. She hesitated, glanced around, and crouched down to pull it free. The letter was old, its ink faded, its edges frayed. But one sentence stood out clearly among the smudges. "If anyone finds this, know that my death was not an accident. My husband is to blame." Beatrice froze. A cold ripple ran through her. Beneath the message was a name, written in a trembling hand, Eleanor Cunningham. Her breath caught. Cunningham. Her own surname. For a long moment, she stared at the paper, unsure whether to laugh or scream. It could have been coincidence, there were other Cunninghams in Somerset, surely. But something about the handwriting, elegant and deliberate, stirred a strange unease in her chest. When she finally slipped the letter into her pocket, the sky had grown darker again. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the hills. That evening, she mentioned it lightly to Edward over dinner. He was seated across the table, reading the paper as he always did. The silverware gleamed between them. "I found something curious by the bridge today," she said softly. An old letter. Signed by a woman called Eleanor Cunningham. At once, his eyes lifted. For a heartbeat, his calm expression faltered. He smiled quickly, but Beatrice saw the way his hand trembled as he set down his glass. "How peculiar," he said evenly. "Probably some local story. You do have a taste for old mysteries." Beatrice smiled back, but the air between them felt heavy, sharp as glass. Later that night, she could not sleep. She slipped from the bed and went to her writing desk, studying the letter under the glow of a single lamp. There was something else written faintly along the margin, nearly invisible beneath the faded ink. She leaned closer, tracing the letters with her fingertip. It read, "Beneath the bridge. Beneath the stones." A sudden sound made her spin around, the soft creak of a floorboard in the hallway. She waited, listening. Nothing followed. Yet when she looked again at the letter, she noticed something she hadn't before. A faint red stain along the bottom edge. Not ink. Her hand trembled as she set it down. Somewhere beyond the house, the wind howled through the trees, and Beatrice felt certain that whoever Eleanor Cunningham had been, she was not finished telling her story. The following morning, the rain had ceased, but a thin mist lingered above the River Avon. Beatrice stood on the bridge once more, clutching the letter in her gloved hand. The words, "Beneath the bridge. Beneath the stones," echoed in her mind like a refrain she could not silence. She glanced over the edge. The water below moved lazily, pale and cold, carrying fallen leaves and fragments of branches from the hills upstream. To any passerby, she might have looked like a woman lost in thought. Yet her pulse was racing. She crouched beside the lowest arch where moss clung thickly to the stones. Her fingers brushed along the cracks until she felt something different, a hollow space. Carefully, she pulled away a small rock. Behind it lay a rusted tin box, no bigger than a diary. Her breath hitched as she prized it open. Inside were fragments of letters, a small key, and a locket. The locket, when opened, revealed a portrait of a woman with dark hair and mournful eyes, Eleanor Cunningham. Beatrice's heart thudded. The name was no coincidence now. She slipped the locket into her pocket just as the crunch of footsteps echoed behind her. She turned sharply. A man stood at the far end of the bridge, wearing a long coat and a hat pulled low over his brow. For a moment, he simply watched her. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared down the misty path leading into the trees. That night, Beatrice could not shake the unease. She sat by the fireplace, the locket resting on her palm. Edward had not come home yet, and the clock ticked loudly in the silence. She traced the tiny portrait with her thumb, wondering who Eleanor truly was, and what had become of her. The door opened suddenly. Edward stepped inside, rain-soaked and pale. He looked startled to see her still awake. "You're up late," he said. "I couldn't sleep," she replied softly. "I went back to the bridge today." Edward's expression stiffened. "Why would you do that?" "There was something hidden there," she said. "A box, with her things." He said nothing, only stared at her with that cold, calculating gaze she had seen before but never understood. Then, with a forced calmness, he walked to the cabinet, poured himself a drink, and turned his back to her. "You shouldn't meddle in what doesn't concern you, Beatrice," he said quietly. "Old stories have a way of unraveling the living." His words hung in the air, heavy with warning. That night, Beatrice dreamed of the river. She saw the woman from the locket standing knee-deep in the water, her dark hair drifting like ribbons in the current. She was calling Beatrice's name. When Beatrice reached out, the woman's hand, pale and dripping, rose from the river to grasp hers. Beatrice woke with a cry, heart pounding, her nightdress damp with sweat. She turned on the lamp, and froze. The locket she had left on her desk was gone. By the time morning light touched the windows of the Cunningham residence, Beatrice had already searched the entire house. Drawers opened and closed, cupboards emptied, carpets lifted, yet the locket was gone as though it had never existed. Edward watched her quietly from the doorway, still in his dressing gown, holding a cup of tea. "You're in quite a state," he remarked. "Surely you didn't lose something so trivial." Beatrice straightened slowly, her pulse thudding. "It's not trivial." "You took it, didn't you?" He chuckled softly, setting down the cup. "My dear, if I wanted to take your trinkets, I would hardly bother with secrecy." He turned to leave but paused at the threshold. "Do yourself a kindness, Beatrice. Let old ghosts rest." When the door closed behind him, the house seemed to sigh. Beatrice stood motionless, staring at the polished floorboards where his slippers had passed. There was something deliberate in his words, something that told her the locket, and the woman it belonged to, were far from forgotten. That afternoon, while Edward was away in town, Beatrice wandered the corridors of their home. The house, built in the late 18th century, had always felt too grand for them, rooms sealed shut, corridors leading to nowhere, doors she had never seen opened. One in particular had always drawn her eye, a door at the end of the east wing, painted pale grey, with a brass handle that refused to turn. She had once asked Edward about it, and he'd dismissed her question. "Just storage," he had said. Yet now, with her heart pounding and the key from the tin box clutched in her palm, she wondered if that had ever been true. The key slid easily into the lock. A faint click sounded, followed by the slow groan of hinges unused for decades. The smell hit her first, damp wood, dust, and something faintly metallic. Inside, the room was dim, the curtains drawn tight. Old furniture stood beneath white sheets, and on the far wall hung portraits long forgotten. Beatrice stepped closer, brushing away cobwebs from one of the frames. It was a painting of Eleanor Cunningham. The same eyes, the same expression as the locket, only here she was painted standing in front of the very house Beatrice now lived in. Her hands rested gently on her stomach, as though hiding something. Beatrice's gaze drifted lower and froze. There were dark stains across the bottom of the canvas, subtle, but unmistakable. Blood. Behind her, the floor creaked. She turned sharply, heart hammering. The doorway was empty. The house had fallen silent again. Then, faintly, from behind the covered furniture, came a whisper. A woman's voice, soft, trembling, almost pleading. "Find me." Beatrice stumbled back, her breath ragged. The curtains fluttered though the windows were closed. The whisper came again, closer now, carrying her name this time. Beatrice. The lamp flickered, and in the reflection of the glass frame, she saw a shape move, a shadow gliding across the room, stopping just behind her shoulder. Her scream echoed through the silent corridors of Hawthorne House. The morning after the scream, the servants whispered among themselves, claiming they had heard a woman crying in the east wing long after midnight. Beatrice could not bring herself to tell them the truth, that the voice had called her name. Edward dismissed it all as nonsense. "You've been reading too many Gothic tales," he said coolly over breakfast, folding his newspaper with deliberate calm. "Perhaps you ought to rest. You've been fragile lately." His words stung, but Beatrice said nothing. She had learned that silence could be sharper than argument. That afternoon, when he left for his office in town, she returned to the locked room. Dust still hung thick in the air, and the painting of Eleanor seemed to stare back at her with silent urgency. She stepped closer, studying the canvas. The surface had a slight bulge, as though something was hidden behind it. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the frame from the wall. Behind the portrait lay a small recess carved into the plaster. Inside, wrapped in decayed linen, was a book, its leather cover cracked and brittle. She carried it to the light, unwrapped the cloth, and opened the first page. It was a diary. The first line read, "June, 1894. My name is Eleanor Cunningham. If this book is found, then my soul may finally rest." Beatrice's throat tightened. She read on, unable to stop. Eleanor had been Edward's great-grandmother. The diary spoke of her marriage to Thomas Cunningham, a man described as charming to society, but cruel in private. Eleanor wrote of his temper, his affairs, and the fear that grew in her every day. Then the entries darkened. She wrote of a pregnancy she had hidden, and of her husband's rage when he discovered the truth. The final entry was written in hurried, uneven script. "He knows. He said no one will ever find me. But I have hidden proof, beneath the bridge, beneath the stones." Beatrice stared at the words, her hands shaking. The same phrase. The same bridge. She turned the next page, but it was blank, except for one faint fingerprint, smeared with what looked like dried blood. Just then, the sound of a carriage stopping outside reached her ears. She jumped, closing the diary quickly. Through the window she saw Edward stepping out, much earlier than usual. Her heart pounded as she hid the diary beneath the floorboards. Moments later, he entered the house, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. "Beatrice," his voice called. "Are you upstairs?" She stayed silent, holding her breath. "I've spoken to the vicar," he continued. "He tells me you've been asking about Hawthorne Bridge. About our family's past." Beatrice's pulse raced. She could hear him drawing closer, each step deliberate. "Some stories," he said softly, "just beyond the door, should remain buried." The doorknob turned. Beatrice stumbled back, searching for something, anything, to defend herself. Her hand brushed against the edge of the frame that once held Eleanor's portrait. She raised it just as the door swung open. But it wasn't Edward who stood there. It was the man from the bridge, the stranger in the long coat, his face pale as ash. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "He'll do to you what he did to her." Beatrice stood frozen in front of the portrait, her eyes tracing every detail of the woman's face. The likeness was impossible to deny, the woman looked exactly like her. The same dark eyes, the same tilt of the head, even the faint scar above the eyebrow she had earned as a child. Her hands trembled as she touched the dusty frame. The nameplate beneath it read, "Catherine Cunningham, 1894 to 1918. Beatrice felt her heart pound painfully. Catherine Cunningham. The surname was unmistakable, she had married into this name. Behind her, the floor creaked. She spun around, but no one was there. Only the sound of dripping water echoed faintly through the old house. That night, sleep refused to come. The wind howled against the windows, and Beatrice thought she heard whispers beneath the storm. When she rose to shut the curtains, she saw something that made her blood run cold, a woman's reflection in the glass, standing right behind her. But when she turned, the room was empty. In the morning, Edward found her sitting at the kitchen table, pale and silent. "You've hardly slept," he remarked softly. "You shouldn't go rummaging through old rooms. They bring bad dreams." She looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Edward, who was Catherine Cunningham?" His face stiffened for the briefest moment, so brief that another might have missed it. But Beatrice saw it clearly. He forced a smile. "She was a distant relative. Died long ago." "Why?" Beatrice hesitated, watching him pour tea as though nothing had changed. "Because she looks just like me," she said quietly. Edward laughed lightly, though his hand shook as he set down the teapot. "You're imagining things." But later that afternoon, when Beatrice returned to the locked room, the portrait was gone. The entire wall where it had hung was bare, leaving only faint outlines where the frame had been. And on the floor lay a single rose petal, fresh, red, and damp, as though left by someone who had just been there. Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. The whispers she had once dismissed as tricks of the wind now seemed to grow louder, circling her, carrying one haunting word over and over again. "Remember." Beatrice could not shake the word echoing in her head. Remember. It haunted her through every creak of the house, every whispering gust by the window. She needed answers, and she knew where to find them, in the study Edward kept locked. That evening, after Edward left for a meeting in Bath, Beatrice searched for the key. She found it tucked inside his coat pocket, hidden beneath his handkerchief. Her pulse raced as she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The study was cold, smelling faintly of tobacco and old books. On the desk lay a heavy leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was unmistakably Edward's. At first, it seemed to be a record of property deeds and family accounts, until she turned a page marked Hawthorne Bridge. The entries were chillingly detailed. Dates. Names. Payments. And beside one entry, the name Catherine Cunningham was scrawled, followed by the words "incident concealed." Beatrice's hand shook. She turned another page and gasped. There was another name written beneath Catherine's, her own. Beatrice Cunningham. Next to it, a date, this year. And the same phrase beneath, incident pending. The ledger slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a thud. For a long moment she stood frozen, heart pounding in her ears. What incident? What did he plan? Suddenly, a soft sound came from behind her, the door clicking shut. Beatrice turned slowly. Edward stood in the doorway, his face expressionless, his eyes cold. "You should not have opened that," he said quietly. His tone carried neither anger nor surprise, only a calm certainty that made her blood run cold. Beatrice tried to speak, but her throat felt tight. "What is this, Edward? What have you done?" He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her face. "Some things," he said softly, "are better left buried. Just like Catherine." Beatrice backed away until her legs struck the desk. "You killed her," she whispered. "You killed Catherine." Edward's smile was thin. "Killed is such a heavy word. I simply corrected a mistake." He reached out to close the ledger, but Beatrice grabbed it and ran, out of the study, through the hall, her footsteps echoing through the dark house. Behind her, she could hear Edward's voice, calm yet terrifyingly close. "You cannot run from what's already written, my dear." The rain came that night without warning. Heavy, relentless, and cold, drumming against the roof of Hawthorne House as if trying to wash away its sins. Beatrice fled into the storm, clutching the ledger against her chest. She didn't know where she was running, only that she had to reach the one place where everything had begun, Hawthorne Bridge. Her breath came in ragged gasps as her boots splashed through the muddy path. The bridge loomed ahead, dark and glistening under the trembling glow of the street lamps. The river below roared, swollen with rain, whispering the same word that had haunted her dreams. Remember. Beatrice stopped at the center of the bridge, soaked through, the wind tearing at her hair. She opened the ledger and flipped to the last page, the one with her name. Beneath it, in Edward's hand, new words had appeared. To be completed, upon the river. A shiver ran down her spine. Behind her, footsteps. Slow. Measured. The sound of a man approaching. Beatrice, Edward's voice called through the storm. Please, come away from there. You'll catch your death. She turned to face him, her hair plastered to her face, rain running down her cheeks like tears. It was here, wasn't it? This is where you killed her. Edward stepped closer, his expression unreadable. She wanted to leave me, he said softly. She thought she could take everything, my name, my inheritance, my future. I couldn't allow that. You understand, don't you? Beatrice shook her head, stepping back as he advanced. No, Edward. I'm not like her. He smiled faintly. No, my love. You're worse. You found out. Before she could react, he lunged. The ledger flew from her hands, pages tearing as it fell into the raging river below. Beatrice stumbled, her hands clutching the cold rail of the bridge. Edward, please, she cried. You don't have to do this. His voice was almost gentle. It's already written, Beatrice. You were never meant to survive this night. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face, calm, resolved, monstrous. But in that same flash, another figure appeared behind him. A woman's outline, pale and shimmering through the rain, her eyes filled with fury. Edward froze. His breath caught. Catherine, he whispered. Before he could move, the ghostly figure reached for him. Edward staggered backwards, his heel slipping on the wet stone. There was a single, sharp cry, and then the sound of a splash swallowed by thunder. Beatrice fell to her knees, trembling, watching the river's surface swallow everything. The storm began to ease, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw the woman again, standing on the far side of the bridge, her face calm, her lips forming silent words. Remember me. Then the vision faded, leaving only the rain, the river, and the soft sound of the current carrying the ledger, and Edward, away. The morning dawned pale and quiet over Hawthorne Bridge. The storm had passed, leaving the river swollen but calm, its surface reflecting the grey sky above. Beatrice sat on the riverbank, soaked to the bone, the diary clutched tightly against her chest. She had survived the night, but the memory of Edward's cold eyes and Catherine's ghostly warning remained etched in her mind. She watched the river, waiting. For a sign. For some understanding of what had truly happened. The wind stirred the reeds, and a faint whisper seemed to travel across the water. Remember. Beatrice took a deep breath. She opened the diary she had recovered from the hidden room. Eleanor's words spoke to her now not as the writings of a long-dead woman, but as guidance. Every secret, every hidden ledger, every tragedy, it had all led to this moment. To truth. Weeks passed. Hawthorne House remained quiet, abandoned by those who had once served it. Beatrice returned often to the river, piecing together the fragments of history hidden beneath stones, beneath lies, beneath fear. She discovered the bridge's secret markers, hidden letters, and even the final resting place of Catherine Cunningham. With each discovery, the weight of the past lifted slightly. The ledger had disappeared with Edward, but the diary remained, a record of courage, of survival, and of women who had refused to be silenced. Beatrice learned that family legacies were not only bloodlines but truths hidden in shadowed corners, waiting for those brave enough to uncover them. On the final day, standing on the bridge, Beatrice whispered softly into the wind. I will remember you, Catherine. I will remember you, Eleanor. And as the sunlight touched the river, warming the cold stones beneath her feet. She felt a presence pass beside her, gentle, reassuring, finally at peace. The river flowed on, carrying memories, secrets, and whispers, but the silence now was hers alone. Hawthorne had kept its secrets for centuries, but today, it had finally spoken.